Anda kembali di Profit CNBC Indonesia bersama saya Daniel Wiguna. Dan kita beralih ke informasi selanjutnya, di mana bursa saham utama di Amerika Serikat ditutup menguat signifikan di zona hijau pagi tadi, di mana optimisme investor muncul menjelang hasil pemilihan presiden antara Biden dan Trump. Dow Jones Industrial Average ditutup menguat 2,06%, Nasdaq menguat 1,85%, dan S&P 500 menguat 1,78%. Kejelasan hasil dari Pilpres di Amerika Serikat sangat dinanti oleh pelaku pasar. Namun risiko muncul apabila terjadi ketidakpuasan berlebihan antara kandidat atas hasil akhir dan juga potensi penghitungan ulang, di mana di sisi lain investor juga tengah menanti hasil pemilihan Senat yang juga tengah berlangsung. Dan untuk berdiskusi terkait dengan US election dan bagaimana pasar merespon terhadap situasi ini, kita akan dan sudah terhubung bersama Thomas J. Hayes, Chairman and Managing Member Great Hill Capital dari New York, Amerika Serikat. Good morning from Indonesia, Thomas. How are you?
Good morning, Daniel. Thank you for having me on today.
Okay, we're also happy to have you to give us some update about the US election, because the global investor focus is now on the US election. So what is the latest update and what is the most concern about the US election?
Yeah, well, the market was convinced, and the consensus was that there was going to be a blue wave, which would have meant the Biden presidency, the Senate, and the House. And as the data is coming in now, I think many people were surprised that it looks like President Trump is going to win Florida, and he's picking up steam in North Carolina, Georgia, Wisconsin, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, and of course, Texas. Albeit it's too early to call many of those states, I think it's really exceeded a lot of people's expectation. And now consensus has shifted from a blue wave to a possible gridlock outcome where no one controls all the houses of government. So this is a very new and positive development. If you look at the futures are up on this news, and this is somewhat surprising.
Okay, and then as we see about the campaign by incumbent President Donald Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden has given the outside world an insight into the issues that matter to American voters. What is the most issue that is matter to the American voters?
Yeah, well, there are a number of them. There are about four, Daniel, that I want to focus on here. First is healthcare. Of course, Vice President Biden wants a public option, more government control over healthcare, whereas President Trump wants privatized healthcare at lower costs. The core issue, though, is taxes moving forward. Vice President Biden wants to raise taxes both on corporations from 21% to 28%, which would have a bad impact on earnings. He also wants to raise the long-term capital gains for people who own stocks over the long term from a 20% capital gains rate to ordinary income, which could be as high as 39%. The COVID policies are somewhat different. President Trump wants to open up the economy. He's confident we're going to have a vaccine in a number of weeks, whereas Vice President Biden wants to open more slowly and keep more restrictions in place, which would hinder the economy in the short term. And then finally is the economy and the jobs. And President Trump is focused on recreating jobs. We've already regained more than 12 million jobs that were lost as a result of COVID. So that's been a core central theme to his campaign. And Vice President Biden wants to focus on first defeating COVID and then worrying about jobs later. So that's really the core issues, Daniel.
Okay. On the other hand, it has also highlighted the political polarization. Splitting the U.S. electorate is the one of the biggest concern. So, from your point of view, what is the most concern about from investor point of view?
Yeah, the polarization, it's interesting you bring that up, Daniel. That's a great question. You know, pre-COVID, when you saw many groups in the country doing extremely well, we had our lowest unemployment rate since post-World War II, since the early 1950s. And wages at the low end of the economic strata were actually going up. So we had wage inflation. And it was during that period that we really didn't have as much aggressive politicization as we have right now. It was after many people lost their jobs and the economy got very difficult that the polarization really started to accelerate. And I think as we come through the election and once we have some finality, whatever the outcome is with the election, I think things will start to slowly go back to normal and some of that polarization will calm down a bit and the economy can move forward. I think the key thing that everyone's looking for, whether it was a blue wave or now it's potentially going to be gridlock, is what's going to be the stimulus package going forward. And that's going to go a long way to help with jobs.
So is the polarization also the biggest fear for the investor right now? And what is the other thing that investors fear right now?
Yeah, so I think investors are a little bit worried about potential additional shutdowns like you're seeing in certain parts of Europe and certain restrictions. That would be the biggest thing that would hit the economy, is if you had more shutdowns and a slower reopening of the economy. I think that investors are also a little bit worried about the corporate tax increase in the case of a blue wave. You would need a full sweep. The Democrats have confirmed they're holding the House of Representatives, so that's Democratic. It's still up in the air about the Senate, and we still don't know the presidency yet. But so I think you see the corporate tax rate. I think you see the long-term capital gains rate. If you did get a blue wave and it looked like that was going to be implemented, you might see some selling before the end of the year, with people wanting to lock in the lower long-term capital gains rate before it nearly doubles, which would go into effect at some point in the future in the case of a blue wave.
Interesting that you mentioned about the blue wave, because investors are betting that a so-called blue wave scenario in which Democrats win the White House, obtain a Senate majority, and keep control of the House could facilitate the passing of new fiscal stimulus as the economy continues its recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. And the question is, which candidate that will focus to make it clear?
Yeah, so basically, if you did get the blue wave, you're going to see stimulus no matter what the election outcome. The question is going to be the size of that stimulus. So if you got the blue wave, you'd probably see something greater than $2 trillion, maybe even as high as $3 trillion. There would be more money in it to help the local states that are in trouble because of COVID. Whereas if you got a gridlock type of situation, the Republican Senate might hold it a little bit smaller, maybe to $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion. So that's really the core contrast between the potential election outcomes moving forward.
Okay, so what is the investors' hope for economic policy right now?
Yeah, so the number one thing that investors are looking for immediately and in massive scale is going to be the big stimulus to help those people that are without jobs, to help small businesses so they don't have to close up. We'd like to see an extension of the PPP program, which helps small businesses, help keep people on the payroll, help the airline industry, keep them in place so as travel starts to pick up, that's already in place and they don't have to restart from scratch. So I think that's number one. And then number two, if you do get a gridlock outcome, which wasn't really in the consensus, that the corporate tax rate would remain low at 21%, which would really accelerate job creation. And we could see GDP growth in excess of 6% in 2021 if we don't increase that corporate tax rate. So before tonight, that was kind of off the table, and now it's back on the table, and the futures are responding accordingly. They're up overnight now on the potential that maybe we have more of a gridlock outcome.
Okay. Thomas will be continuing this discussion after the break. Dan jangan kemana-mana, karena dialog kami akan lanjutkan usai jeda. Tetaplah bersama kami di Profit. Anda kembali di Profit CNBC Indonesia dan kami masih terhubung bersama Thomas J. Hayes, Chairman and Managing Member dari Great Hill Capital dari New York, Amerika Serikat. Thomas, do you still connected to us?
Yes.
Yeah, Thomas, let's continue to discuss about how's the market impact from the U.S. election. We know and we see that Joe Biden now have more vote. It's 131, and Donald Trump has like 108. So what will be the impact to the stocks market? What sector will be boosted if Biden wins the vote? Is it the energy section? Because we know that Biden have more concern about green energy.
Yeah, so if you have a Biden presidency, which is now less certain than it was at the time that the market closed, what you would see is an interest in clean energy, in solar, less of an interest in conventional energy or fossil fuels. You would see also a boost in healthcare. Healthcare stocks and insurers did very well under the Obama administration with the government programs. You'd also see probably an interest in China stocks because trade relations would be better. There would be more free trade in that regard. You'd see a move into tech stocks as well. A lower growth environment would be favorable for tech stocks. And then lastly, you'd see a move back into municipal bonds because there would be a bigger stimulus package to bail out the local states. Now, if you did have Trump win the election, then what you would see, Daniel, is certainly a big rebound in financial stocks, in energy stocks, in defense stocks, and then in small caps and value, which is a contrast to Biden, of course.
So knowing this information, what would be the best thing that investors do right now? Is it to wait and see until the election finish, or people can start to chip into some energy or healthcare? Because we know that Biden still win the vote, 131.
Yeah, I think it's very early to decide who's going to win. We're not going to know Pennsylvania tonight. I think what you're seeing is just the early states reflected in your information right now. The swing states that are going to matter, that have a lot of the electoral votes, are going to be much later in the night. So I wouldn't do anything on that basis, because actually, if you look at the Chinese yuan right now, it's weakening dramatically. And what that tells us is that it's no longer a foregone conclusion that Biden is going to win. If Biden was going to win, the yuan would be stronger because things would get better for China. Under Trump, trade relations are a little bit more tense, and that's less favorable for the Chinese yuan. So I think as far as how you want to think about this is, right now the futures are up on the new information that it's not necessarily going to be a blue wave, and on that basis, if you got any weakness, I think it's an opportunity to buy for the long term, because no matter who gets elected, the common theme, Daniel, is that you're going to see massive stimulus. It's just a question of the size. And when you have all of the monetary stimulus, if you look around the world right now, you've got $12 trillion of fiscal stimulus and potentially another $2 trillion coming from the U.S., and you have $7.5 trillion of monetary liquidity. This is all very, very, very positive for asset prices as that gets into the system on a 6 to 9 month lag. So you definitely want to be an owner of equities. Just sit through any short-term volatility if we don't have an immediate election outcome. But over the long term, cash is going to be less valuable and assets are going to be more valuable. So you want to make sure you have exposure.
Okay. Yeah, because this is interesting, because we still see the rise of the price of safe haven like gold and also asset. So what is the best strategy that we can see now? Is it to invest more to safe haven asset?
Yeah, I think it's kind of the opposite, actually. Gold is more of an inflation hedge, and what gold will do is protect your purchasing power over time. But if you compare gold to buying stocks in high-quality companies that retain purchasing power with the consumer, stocks dramatically outperform over the long term. As a matter of fact, if you'd invested $10,000 in stocks in 1942 or $10,000 in gold in 1942, you would have $50 million more from stocks than you would have from gold. So while gold protected your purchasing power, stocks made you wealthy over time. So I would definitely use this with all the money circulating in the system on a global basis. This is really an opportunity to get involved in high quality equities for the long term and just shrug off any short-term volatility.
Okay, so what is the projection about gold price that we can see in maybe in a medium-term horizon, as you predict?
Yeah, I think again, gold will over time go up because you are going to see a tremendous amount of deficit spending around the world with all the stimulus required to bring us out of the coronavirus pandemic. But while gold will go up and preserve purchasing power, equities will go up much more because you have to think about those large companies will be able to retain their pricing power in a moderately inflationary environment. So I think a better bet than gold, everyone's focused on gold. Yeah, you'll be able to buy the same suit 5 years down the road because gold will be appreciated. But with equities, you might be able to buy 5 or 7 suits. So, and by the way, gold is non-yielding. You get paid nothing to hold it. You're just betting on price. Whereas high quality equities, you're going to get growing dividends over time that pay you income while it appreciates. So I think that's a smarter play given this environment and the opportunity, in a sense, that the 2020 market has provided, bringing some equity markets down and enabling people to buy it at a lower price for the long term.
So for the long-time investor, is it better for them to buy more the bonds because we see there is still uncertainty from safe haven also, and also the equity market? Is it better to long-time investor to buy bonds?
Yeah, well, I think for most of the bonds around the world, government bonds around the world, if you look in the developed world, are almost at negative yields. So you're actually losing money by holding them. And if you do get an increase in interest rates, which people are expecting because of all the deficit spending, for every percentage point of interest rate increases, those bonds can really fall. So while your financial advisor will say to have some portion of bonds to balance out the portfolio, I think over time, if you're in the highest quality stocks, not speculative stocks, but high quality, durable franchises that grow over time, like a Coca-Cola, like a Procter and Gamble, like a Colgate, the big bellwethers, I think over time you're going to do much better with that, and you just have to ignore the short-term volatility because you're going to get paid dividends to wait. The dividends are going to increase, and over time the price will appreciate it. Whereas bonds, your upside is limited, and your downside might be very material if interest rates start to rise. So I think it's a much better play to think about high-quality equities for the long term.
Okay, and for the equity market, when will the signal of foreign investor will be back into the emerging market? Because we know that Indonesia or maybe some country in Asia, well, we can say that suffering because there is more net capital outflow that happening.
Yeah, I think that's just a short-term fear. I think the prognosis for the emerging markets, and in particular Indonesia, is very, very promising because you have favorable demographics. I think we're at the beginning of a long-term commodity cycle. Commodities have been left for dead. They're trading at multi-decade lows, but the demand is going to pick up dramatically as we recover from COVID. And Indonesia is in a perfect position to benefit, and many of the emerging market economies. So I definitely want to be in commodity-centric economies and their stock markets for the long term. And I think you're going to benefit greatly by having exposure there now while the prices are subdued, and you can benefit from the long-term capital appreciation. So yeah, 100% I want to bet on Indonesia, and I want to continue to bet on emerging markets for sure.
Okay, that sounds like a good idea also for a global investor. Thomas J. Hayes, Chairman and Managing Member, Great Hill Capital, thank you very much for your insight. Rabu 3 November menjadi momen bersejarah bagi negeri Paman Sam yang menggelar pemilu di tengah pandemi. Baik sang petahana Donald Trump maupun penantang dari kubu Demokrat Joe Biden berebut suara pemilih dengan mengemukakan pandangan yang bertolak belakang untuk menjawab sejumlah isu. Mulai dari pandemi corona hingga perang dagang. Siapakah yang unggul? Berikut informasinya untuk Anda.
Ajang pemilu negeri Paman Sam tahun 2020 menjadi agenda yang dinanti-nantikan dunia. Pasalnya, siapa yang akan terpilih memimpin negara adidaya ini akan turut mempengaruhi peta perpolitikan dan ekonomi dunia setidaknya hingga 4 tahun mendatang. Kiblat kebijakan ekonomi kepala negara Amerika Serikat menjadi semakin penting diperhitungkan di tengah pandemi COVID-19 yang telah membuat jutaan nyawa melayang, plus lonjakan angka pengangguran di berbagai belahan dunia. Dan perlu diketahui, sang petahana dari kubu Republik Donald Trump dan sang penantang dari Demokrat Joe Biden punya pandangan yang bertolak belakang dalam banyak hal.
Would you close down the oil industry?
By the way, I would transition from the oil industry, yes.
Oh,
I will
that's
transition.
a big statement.
It is a big statement.
That's a
because
big statement.
I would stop.
Why would you do that?
Because the oil industry pollutes significantly. Because it has to be replaced by renewable energy over time. And I'd stop giving to the oil industry, I'd stop giving them federal subsidies. This plan has been endorsed by every major environmental group and every labor group. Labor, because they know the future lies. The future lies in us being able to breathe, and they know there are good jobs in getting us there. And by the way, the fastest growing industry in America is solar energy and wind. He thinks wind causes cancer, windmills. It's the fastest growing jobs, and they pay good prevailing wages.
You know more about wind than you do. It's extremely expensive, kills all the birds, it's very intermittent, it's got a lot of problems, and they happen to make the windmills in both Germany and China, and the fumes coming up, if you're a believer in carbon emission, the fumes coming up to make these massive windmills is more than anything that we're talking about with natural gas, which is very clean. One other thing.
Dan pandangan soal energi hanyalah satu dari sekian perbedaan pandangan Trump dan Biden. Mereka juga berselisih jalan soal perang dagang, di mana Biden meyakini ekonomi Amerika Serikat justru terpuruk sejak berkonfrontasi dengan China. Sementara Trump membanggakan meningkatnya penjualan produk agrikultur Amerika Serikat karena kesepakatan yang dihasilkan setelah perang dagang. Hal yang tak jauh berbeda juga terjadi pada isu-isu sensitif seperti pajak. Trump yang menerapkan pajak rendah bagi masyarakat berpenghasilan tinggi dan korporasi lebih disukai pasar, meskipun berujung pada kemungkinan terbatasnya kebijakan fiskal yang bisa ditelurkan untuk menangani pandemi jika Trump terpilih untuk yang kedua kalinya. Sementara Biden yang lebih bernuansa Commonwealth menjanjikan pajak akan dikembalikan ke porsi sebelum Trump memimpin, yakni hampir 40%. Namun di sisi lain, ia berjanji pemerintahannya dapat menggelontorkan stimulus hingga 2,5 triliun dolar Amerika Serikat untuk pemulihan ekonomi. Pandangan yang berseberangan juga terlihat dalam topik upah minimum serta boleh tidaknya membuka kembali kegiatan ekonomi saat COVID-19 masih merajalela. Perselisihan pandangan juga terlihat di wakil masing-masing kandidat, yakni Mike Pence dan Kamala Harris.
Over 7 million people who have contracted this disease. And here's the thing. On January 28th, the Vice President and the President were informed about the nature of this pandemic. They knew what was happening and they didn't tell you. Can you imagine if you knew on January 28th, as opposed to March 13th, what they knew, what you might have done to prepare? They knew and they covered it up.
The fact that you continue to undermine public confidence in a vaccine, if the vaccine emerges during the Trump administration, I think is unconscionable. And Senator, I just ask you, stop playing politics with people's lives. The reality is that we will have a vaccine, we believe, before the end of this year. And it will have the capacity to save countless American lives, and your continuous undermining of confidence in a vaccine is it's just unacceptable.
Hasil jajak pendapat CNBC menunjukkan jelang pemilihan, Biden unggul tipis atas Trump dengan perolehan 50% berbanding 46%. Sementara sisanya adalah swing voters. Menariknya, survei menunjukkan Biden unggul di Arizona, Florida, Michigan, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, dan Wisconsin yang sempat menjadi kantong suara Trump pada 2016 lalu. Sejumlah pihak meyakini publik kecewa dengan cara pemerintahan Trump mengatasi pandemi COVID-19 yang sejauh ini telah menginfeksi lebih dari 9,5 juta warga negeri Paman Sam dan menyebabkan angka pengangguran melonjak ke titik yang tak pernah dibayangkan sebelumnya. Harus diakui, Amerika Serikat tak luput dari gempuran COVID-19 yang membuat ekonominya terjun bebas di kuartal 2 2020. Meskipun melonjak drastis di kuartal 3 2020 ke level 30% secara kuartalan. Jadi, Trump atau Biden? Siapapun presidennya tidak hanya memikul beban memulihkan ekonomi negeri berpenduduk lebih dari 334 juta jiwa, namun juga membuat keputusan yang menentukan hidup lebih dari 6 miliar penduduk dunia. Tim Liputan CNBC Indonesia.
Dan selanjutnya Syarifah Rahma akan menyampaikan informasi internasional. Silakan Iva.
Ya, di informasi internasional yang pertama, Bursa Efek Shanghai dan Hong Kong kompak telah menangguhkan aksi penawaran umum saham perdana atau IPO Jumbo Ant Group pada Selasa waktu setempat. Penangguhan terjadi lantaran Ant Group baru-baru ini melaporkan kepada regulator sekuritas China terkait perubahan signifikan dalam lingkungan regulasi. Perkembangan besar ini mungkin membuat Ant Group gagal memenuhi persyaratan pencatatan pada saat IPO. Ant Group ditetapkan untuk go public di Hong Kong dan Shanghai pada Kamis setelah mengumpulkan dana sekitar 37 miliar dolar Amerika Serikat atau setara dengan 540 triliun rupiah. Bursa saham Hong Kong menolak untuk mengomentari penangguhan bursa Shanghai terkait IPO Ant di Hong Kong. Regulator keuangan top China sendiri sudah memanggil pendiri Ant Group, Jack Ma, dan 2 eksekutif puncak ke pertemuan pada hari Senin kemarin. Ya, sementara itu laba bersih Aramco jeblok hingga 44% di kuartal ketiga tahun 2020 akibat gejolak yang terjadi di harga minyak mentah. Di kuartal ketiga tahun 2020, Saudi Aramco mencatatkan laba bersih sebesar 44,2 miliar rial atau setara dengan 11,8 miliar dolar Amerika Serikat. Pemangkasan produksi minyak mentah dilakukan serta pandemi COVID-19 sangat menekan kinerja Saudi Aramco. Namun perusahaan masih akan mempertahankan untuk membagikan dividen sebesar 18,8 miliar dolar Amerika Serikat pada kuartal keempat tahun 2020. Saudi Aramco juga akan memangkas belanja modal di tahun ini menjadi hanya 25 miliar dolar hingga 30 miliar dolar Amerika Serikat, turun dari tahun 2019 sebesar 32,7 miliar dolar Amerika Serikat. Ya, demikian sejumlah informasi terkait korporasi internasional dan berikutnya kita kembali ke Daniel Wiguna.
Terima kasih Iva. Lalu bagaimana hubungan bilateral antara Indonesia dan Amerika Serikat jika Joe Biden menang pemilu atau Donald Trump kembali untuk kedua kalinya ke Gedung Putih? Usai jeda, Muhammad Gibran akan mengulasnya bersama Suzy Sudarman, Direktur Pusat Kajian Wilayah Amerika Universitas Indonesia. Tetaplah bersama kami.